Lab 10 provides a variety of exercises centered around the spectrograms of consonants. In this first question, there's a choice of 4 words: taco, pander, issue, or fountain. You're supposed to choose which word is represented by this spectrogram and indicate what the individual phonemes of the word are. There are a few ways you can approach a problem like this. You can look for particular sounds inside the words. So, for example, in the word taco, we would expect there to be a voiceless stop in the middle. That would give us a period of near silence with no voice bar. I don't see such a thing in this spectrogram, so I think I can rule that out, and maybe I'll cross it off. Okay, let's see, what else could we look for? Well, in the word issue, there is a palatal fricative, also voiceless, in the middle of the word. So again, we'd be looking for a portion of noise with no evidence of a voice bar in it or leading into it or out of it. And again, don't really see a thing that looks like an obvious voiceless fricative here, so I'm going to cross that one out. Between pander and fountain, or fountain, depending on how it was produced, there is a nasal consonant in the middle, and in fact, in this spectrogram, in this region right here, we do have something that looks pretty suspiciously like a nasal. We have a formant frequency that abruptly disappears in the area of the first formant, something that looks almost like near silence here, but with a strong voice bar going all the way through it, and a little bit of evidence of some other lower amplitude formants. In the case of both pander and fountain, that is an N phoneme, so I can go ahead and say, yeah, that's my N. In the case of pander, we would expect to have a voiceless stop at the beginning. One of the cues to a stop is near silence, but since that's at the very beginning of the word, there's always going to be silence at the beginning of the word. That silence will be followed by a transient, and in the case of a voiceless stop, especially one on a stressed syllable like the first syllable is in pander, we would expect a lot of aspiration. So we do have what looks like a transient here with a period of noise after it with no evidence of voicing, indicating a long voice onset time, for example. So this looks quite a bit like a P and does not look nearly as much like an F or a F as it should, given that kind of abrupt transient-like onset at the beginning. Which would mean that in between then, we should have the A vowel. That is a low but front vowel, so we'd expect a relatively high F1, which it looks like we have, and some space in between F1 and F2, where there's a visible separate voice bar beneath F1. For the rest of pander, we'd expect a voiced stop D right after the N. We might expect to see a little bit more silence than we have here, but we do have what looks like a transient at the release of the N, and then we immediately go into phonation, which we would expect with a voiced stop where the voice onset time would be low. And then last but not least, in pander, we would expect an vowel. The vowel should have a relatively low F3 because that indicates rhoticity. And indeed, we have F1, F2, and F3 really close to each other, with F3 decreasing as we go from the D into the Okay. I guess I could put a little bracket down here for the All right, the second question gives us a recording and tells us what the word is, in this case, cashier. What we're supposed to do is identify the different phonetic contents inside of this word. So we have a voiceless stop at the beginning. Let's see, and we're supposed to label a stop burst. Oops, burst. And affrication. I'll do that over here. Sorry, not affrication, aspiration. All right, we're supposed to find a voice bar. In cashier, we have a low front vowel. So we do have a separate voice bar below the F1. So a voice bar down there with F1 there. And F2 above it. Little space in between F1 and F2, as we would expect for a front vowel. All right, let's see. We're supposed to mark some fricative noise, so we would have that in the middle of our sh. Would have been smart of me to just draw the arrow from the word fricative noise. It's already on there, but hey, nobody's perfect. And let's see, so we've done the voice bar, we've done F1 and F2. I haven't done F3 yet. A good place to look for an F3 would be in the case of a rhotic, like the at the end of cashier. So that, for example, would be here. And maybe since things like F3 are ongoing things, I could kind of mark where that is as distinct from the F2, which comes across from here and continues through, or the F1 that was in there. Okay, so I took care of F3, got my stop burst, got my aspiration, and got my fricative noise. So I've marked up cues inside of this word that help identify all the individual phonemes. All right, question 3 gives us 4 monosyllabic words: tail, shake, safe, and rain, but in an unknown order. And our job is to decide which word is there, mark the phonemes, and then also for the consonant phonemes, indicate some of the cues that show the phoneme's identity. Okay, so in the case of this first spectrogram, we have what looks like a fricative at the beginning. That fricative has a fair amount of mid-frequency and above energy. So that is consistent with our palatal fricative sh. Let's see. So I'll mark that as mid-frequency. maybe abbreviate it to not have this be so painful. Noise. Okay, so if that's my word that starts with a sh, then the final consonant has got to be a k. Here we have a burst with mid-frequency energy that is consistent with a velar stop. So that goes along with that k for the word shake. All right. Our second spectrogram here appears to start with something more resonant at the beginning because we have these rising formants for the first and second formant leading into our vowel. At the end, we appear to also have the voice bar continuing into a sound that has some formants associated with it. So if I go back and look at my words, let's see, I have rain as the only one that starts with a resonant consonant, which should mean this is a r at the beginning, which really should mean that I have both F2 and F3 in there. So they kind of come together here at the beginning and then separate as I get up into the vowel. Okay, so we're going to have F3, for example, as a good cue for our r, because that does come down quite low. It doesn't just say start to appear when the vowel comes. It's not the greatest spectrogram to look at in the world, but can see that continuous pattern a little bit. So then at the end we should have a nasal n. Okay, that should have a very low F1 right on top of the voice bar. And then another kind of characteristic that happens with nasals is the F1 for the vowel is in here, but it pretty much disappears as soon as you get into the nasal. The only formant that really looks relatively continuous through this nasal is up here in the region of the F2 for the vowel. Okay. And in general for the nasal, again, low amplitude periodic sound throughout the nasal because of the sound resonating through the nasal cavity. In the third spectrogram, we have something that looks kind of like a transient followed by some aspiration noise. And the darkest part of that transient is up here. So we've got some high frequency. My writing's getting worse. High frequency burst. That's going to be consistent with the t sound. And the t word was the word tail, so we'd be looking for an L at the end. For the L, we have F1 and F2 being relatively low, and F3 being relatively high. So again, we have an F3 clue here, where F3 is quite a bit different from F1 and F2, and that distinguishes an L from an R, rhotic type sound. Okay, so then last but not least, it looks like we have a voiceless fricative here. We have no evidence of periodicity and no voice bar. We have that noise loudest at high frequency. So high frequency noise. So that is my S. And then I believe the word was safe. So the other thing we would have at the end would be a F, which is one of our kind of quiet fricatives. So we might sort of mark that as diffuse noise. Doesn't have any really obvious loud frequency concentration because that fricative is produced at the very front of the vocal tract. Okay, so I believe we successfully have identified all of these words as shake, then rain, then tail, and then safe, where in each case we have the same vowel, so the vowel has roughly similar formant frequencies of kind of lowish F1, because it's a mid-ish vowel, and some space in between it and F2, because it's a front vowel. But because of co-articulation with the sounds around it, the vowel doesn't look exactly the same in each case. It's probably clearest in tail, and least clear in rain, maybe in part because of anticipatory co-articulation, which causes nasalization to begin during the production of the vowel.